Good
Yes.
morning, everyone. Good Sunday morning and welcome. I am excited and very happy to be here to share with you my beloved Springfield Baptist Church located in Augusta, Georgia. I am not in Augusta, Georgia anymore. However, that is the church that my family has been, they were a member of since the early 1800s, and we buried our last family member in 1985. However, I continue when I have a chance to visit Augusta to go and, if not attend a Sunday service, at least go and say hello to some of the people that I know who still attend the church. And of course, I always go past the church. I could not go home and not go and look at the church, although I have lots of pictures. So, what about Springfield Baptist Church is so meaningful to me and to you? Springfield Baptist Church was founded in 2 years. At least that's the way I look at it. Its original founding goes back to 1773. It initially started out in South Carolina as Civil Bluff Baptist Church. And at that point in 1773, there was no indication of, well, maybe there was an indication that an American Revolution was going to take place. Nevertheless, this it started on a plantation, Silver Bluff Baptist Church, where the Reverend there was an itinerant preacher who would come past and wanted to know from the family who owned the slaves there if he could speak to the slaves, and some people would say indoctrinate them with Christianity. Others would say bring the Bible to them. Whatever your point of view, the history says that this itinerant preacher was able to speak to that community. At some point, the owner of the plantation moved into Georgia, and his slaves were he was actually killed during the war, and his slaves went in a lot of different directions. Some went to Jamaica, some went back to Africa, some actually went into Georgia. This happened over a period of years. Ultimately, Reverend Jessie Peters Galphin is part of his name, but Galphin was the name of the slaveholder and the plantation. But Reverend Jesse Peters, took that name. So he often went by both Reverend Jesse Peters or Reverend Jesse Peters Galphin. And in 1773, he comes over to Augusta, Georgia, sometime between 1773 and 1779, and establishes in what is called, or what was called, Springfield Village. Now, Springfield Village at that time was not a part of Augusta, but it eventually was annexed and became part of Augusta, and it is the area in which Springfield Baptist Church was founded. Um, a note that I read recently said that initially the members gathered in what's called a brush harbor. They just gathered together in that area of the city and were worshiping outdoors. However, at some point, they found an enclosure. I've still yet to discover what that initial enclosure was, because there's about a 4-year period when I don't know exactly what building they were in, but it was not the two current buildings that stand. Later, they purchased what is called the St. John's Educational Building from the Methodist Church in Augusta, who was building a new church. And eventually, by 1810, this church had been rolled 6 blocks and established or set on a plot of land that the congregation had purchased, and Springfield Baptist Church was born. Reverend Jessie Peters was its first pastor. He pastored 27 years. That is a very long time. And about 1810, between 1810 and about 1890, I don't have the exact dates in front of me, but a new brick building was established. When you look at the essay that I wrote, you will see the brick building. That is the only building, well, both buildings I knew, but the brick building is what was um, the building that my family actually joined and became part of.
Mm-hmm.
In 1885, I had a great aunt who got got married there. Then I had two other family members in the 1880s who were married there by one of the pastors, Reverend G.H. Dwelly. Reverend Dwelly was also a very long-term pastor. And in my childhood, I basically grew up knowing about four different pastors. And when I say knowing, I personally knew two: the one who baptized me and the one who buried or presided over the funeral of my grandmother. However, my ancestors talked about Reverend W.P. Sanders, who, let me just see, I did write down, I wanted to give you the dates altogether between 1773 and 2026. There have been 26 pastors of Springfield Baptist Church.
Wow.
Of that 26, in my count, approximate between 3 to 5 have spent 27 to 28 years as pastors. So some were there a long time. The average pastor seems to have been there between 3 and 5 years.
Uh-huh.
On the one hand, 26 pastors sounds like a lot, but I think for a church that started in the mid 1700s, before the Revolution, I think they've done extremely well to only have 26. And the 26th pastor, I'm not certain of the exact dates, but he has only been there approximately maybe 7 or 8 years. Um, the last pastor that I knew, Reverend E.T. Martin, passed sometime in the early 2000s, or no, I would say sometime after 2005. The
So you
last
have
time.
so you have this community church that's here for this 250 plus years, just with these congregations and this deep, deep connection that you personally got to know, right?
Yes, I got to know a lot about this community because of my family's association, but also because Springfield Baptist Church is a landmark church. It's given the status of the oldest Black Baptist church in the nation. It There's a kind of a tug of war between it and the First Baptist Church in Savannah, because the same pastor, Reverend Jessie Peters, and another, George Lyle and Andrew Bryan, they went to Savannah and started a church there around 1772. The difference being Springfield Baptist Church has been in the same location since its inception. Whether or not I don't know personally whether or not um, First Baptist in Atlanta in Savannah has been there that entire time. But another significance is that Morehouse College was founded in my church. It was initially called Augusta Baptist Institute when it was there. Then it moved to another church within Augusta and finally to Atlanta. One of the other distinctions with Springfield is that there are about five Baptist churches that evolved from Springfield between 1865 and 1900. One of them being Tabernacle Baptist Church, which is another large church in the community. And Springfield was also responsible for starting the Georgia Equal Rights Association, which ultimately became the Republican Party, but not the same Republican Party of today. The Republican the Republican Party during that period of time was more like our Democratic Party of today. Neither perfect for sure, but definitely that Republican Party was not like the one here. Not here meaning in New
Yeah.
York, but in the United States. Um, Springfield has significance too because it was one of the early churches and entities, educational and political, that advocated for voting rights for African Americans. Um, Reverend he's Reverend and Chaplain Henry McNeil Turner spoke at Springfield on January 1st, 1866. And the meat of his speech was equal rights for women. And he talked about voting. He talked about how Black women in particular were being treated. He talked about how Black people were being treated. At the same time that he was chaplain in the United States Army, he was also serving in the Georgia legislature. Of course, they
Wow.
tried to put him out. There was a little, I won't say a physical scuffle, but the political
Right.
scuffle, but he still remained in that position.
Yeah. Right.
Um, Springfield Baptist Church also started a kindergarten in 1865, where, because they were determined, while the church itself was the congregation, many had been enslaved, others had always been free. They still were focused on education. So the church itself started a small school. Not Morehouse, they did start that, but this was a small school where anyone could come. And I have an article that's in my essay that I published where you can read about that announcement. And the other thing I didn't mention when Barbara and I were talking is that I actually did my dissertation. And it's amazing to me that I kind of forgot that. But my dissertation was half on Springfield Baptist Church and half on my shero, Lucy Craft Laney. Um, as a child growing up, I heard a lot about W.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, um, George Washington Carver. They did not speak at Springfield, but they spoke at Tabernacle, which was an offshoot of Springfield. And Tabernacle was within 5 walking blocks from where I
Mm.
lived. So I am certain that my great grandmother and my grandmother most likely heard them speak. And I am certain as well that many people from Springfield were present when Du Bois and Booker
Yeah.
T and all of these other prominent Black Americans came to little old Augusta to
Yeah.
talk. But
Yeah.
Augusta at one point was also the capital of
Right.
uh, Georgia. And this happened in part because of Sherman's march to the sea and his taking over Savannah and then Atlanta. So
Right.
Augusta has its own history, and with Springfield Baptist Church being as old as it has grown through that history.
Yeah.
During the Revolutionary War, most churches in Augusta served as hospitals, all except Springfield Baptist Church. The soldiers who approached the church, from the stories that I got from my grandmother and others, the men of some men from Springfield locked arms together and walked 2 or 3 blocks from the church to form a barrier to keep the soldiers from coming. So I grew up in a church where there was not only this history, but people willing to put their lives on the
Right.
line for what they
So,
believed.
tell us a little bit about this community of Springfield Village. You talk a little bit about that in your post. And I think this vision of a community locking arms and what they were defending against, what they were protecting, and the pretty terrifying view of these soldiers looking to quarter anywhere they can, to look to pull food from anywhere they can, is pretty terrifying. So tell us about the village.
Well, actually, by the time I joined the church, um, I would say even by the early 1900s, the village as a village no longer existed.
Yeah.
Springfield Baptist Church is located in the downtown area of what is now considered the downtown area of Augusta, Georgia. It is 2 blocks from what's called Broad Street, but Broad Street was like Main Street, and it was where all the department stores, the newspaper, and other businesses were located. So this area of Springfield Village is literally, I think, 2 blocks from the Savannah River. It's also 1 or 1.5 blocks from a bridge taking you over into South Carolina. So there was a very small community of people who lived there. However, as I said, by the time I was born, there were very few houses and people who lived there, but it was still called Springfield Village because by that time, the church had been named. And as I started to say earlier, there was what some call a spring nearby, and then there was the Brush Harbor where the church met, and they kind of combined the two and came up with the name Springfield for the
I see.
name of the church. But the community itself was very, very small. And it was a small community, as far as I know, of free Black people.
Right.
As far as how many people, don't know. I've actually never looked that part up because, as I said, for my entire life, there were never more than 3 or 4 houses in the community because by that time, by the 1940s, that area was really all commercialized. However, the church remained there and continued to grow. Now, at one point, it had over 1,100 members. That was in the late 1800s. During the time that I was a member,
Post Reconstruction.
we
Yeah.
prob even after during the Jim Crow area, the 1940s, 1950s, I would say there was probably never more than about 500 members. Right now, I believe their membership is down under 300, in part because where the church is located, it's in a great area. It's actually in if you visit Augusta, one of the places that you can stay is called Riverwalk. Riverwalk kind of includes the Springfield Village area in that
Mhm.
you can walk from, I think it's the Radisson Hotel or whatever the hotel, it's within 2 blocks of the church. But that
Mm,
area is called Riverwalk because you can walk along the Savannah River. But at the
right.
same time, the village portion of the church of that area disappeared many years ago. I think even before Reconstruction, but it is still called Springfield Village in that the church has erected a park
I love that.
across from the church, across from
Yeah,
the church, and in that park they have two statues there, one representing the history of the church, and the other more of a. They're both spiritual representations, but one more a growth of the soul. At least that's how I
mhm,
interpret it.
mhm. Now, when we spoke earlier, you talked about baptisms that were performed in the river right next
Right.
door. That really touched me in terms of that connection, and that was so early before the church itself was built, right?
Yes. There are pictures at the Hargrave Library, where you can, excuse
Water.
me, somewhere. Sorry.
Not at all. It's the part where we all take a pause, take a little drink, a little something,
Um,
breathe, and keep going. This is
there
incredible.
are pictures where you can see actual baptism in the Savannah River, and I'm pretty sure this occurred before. I guess during Reconstruction, but definitely before the 1900s, because
Yeah.
by that time, the newer church, the brick church, had been built. And in the brick church, underneath the pulpit, they can just open up the floor of the pulpit. And underneath the pulpit is the pool. And I remember the first bench of the church is called the morning, Morning, and Mourning, the morning bench. So we kids were, when it came to baptism, we sat on the first row. And then as the service moved on, we were escorted out into another room. And eventually we came up behind the choir and onto the pulpit. But at that point, the floor had been opened up, and we were actually baptized in the church under the pulpit. And the newer brick church is connected to the old church. So we actually went out through these beautiful stained glass windows that are behind the pulpit. They are windows, but they open up so that when there's a baptism, they can just bring you right up and you go through and into the old church and you get dressed and you come back in your brand new outfit. Because, of course, for baptism, everything you have on is supposed to be new. But I don't remember my grandmother. I know that my grandmother, my mother, and all of the people in my family that I personally knew, my ancestors, they were raised in the newer church. Now, the pictures that I shared with you, I'm not sure if my great aunts were baptized in the river because they were born in the 1850s. So it's quite
That well have been.
possible. But
Yeah.
even
Now
by then, the new church existed, but I'm just not quite sure about their baptism.
now if I remember correctly, you also shared that you sang in the choir, right?
Yes, I sang in the choir from, 6 years of age until about 12. And I also, much later in my life, I considered going into the ministry. And when I considered going into the ministry, I'm not sure what it's called now because I've kind of gotten away from that, but there was a point at which it was called your trial sermon. So I did my first sermon in April of 1978. I quote unquote preached my first
Oh,
sermon
you did?
the medium is the message.
Right.
And I do have a tape recording of it. Maybe I'll make some snippets and post it. But that was a momentous occasion in my life for
Yeah.
sure, because at that moment, I really was seriously considering going into the ministry. I did a second sermon there a few years later, but in between the first and the second, I realized that this is how I explained it to the congregation that day. I am indeed a minister, but not a minister of the gospel. My ministry, and I'm sure they thought, who is this person who's making
It was the
this
70s.
proclamation? Because I said my ministry is much larger than the pulpit. And I could hear the gasp coming from the congregation. But what I meant was that I had decided that I wanted to be a college professor. And I felt that over the course of my life, I would touch many more people
You will.
as students than I would had I become a pastor of one church, whether it was
That's
in
right.
Augusta or someplace else.
That's right.
And so I had to quickly explain that because I didn't want them to think that I thought myself so big, so grand, so great, and that I could make such a pronouncement, especially from the pulpit, the most sacred place
Yeah. Yeah.
in our lives.
Yeah.
But it was because of my training at Springfield, being allowed to participate
Yeah.
in plays and being able to speak before the congregation about whatever, and not as a feature speaker as a child, but perhaps getting up to read the scripture, or during
Right.
Easter, may if there was a Easter pageant, I might have a little role. But that gave me the confidence to speak before people and not be
Yeah.
afraid.
Yeah. This is such a wonderful bundle of the historical stories that you're carrying forward to the way it ties into a community, to the way it helps grow a people. We've had just a plethora of comments bubbling here, like coming from a spring. Crystal comments, kind of where I was going from the start, a strong foundation for the community. A strong foundation for the community for the Black church has carried Springfield Baptist Church for 250 years and many others in this nation. Absolutely. And that's why I'm so privileged to have you here as one of our community share that perspective and insight that the rest of us might never have seen. Um, Dee Batista also chimes in here with the church as a catalyst of survival and advancement in this nation. And thanks you for the many memories that you've brought back. And it's hard for me to just bundle all of these in, as many of you will share these comments, I'm sure, also in the comments from the recording, so we can preserve them, because that's really where this is all going, in terms of preserving these stories, preserving what it has become and how it has carried a community forward. With merely a few hundred churchgoers today, institutions like these need to have their larger history told, their larger story told. And it's an honor to have you here, sharing and repeating and preserving and telling those stories and creating a way for other people to understand and appreciate what that means and why this history is so important to preserve.
I just want to add one more thing, because for me, and I didn't actually realize this until last night, when I was a student at Howard, James Nabrit was the president. I did not know that James Nabrit had also been a pastor at Springfield Baptist Church. So, in so many ways, this church and I will always be partners, because wherever I have been and how I've grown, it's been in some way the inspiration has come through the church. So to have gone to Howard and been a student there at the same time as a former pastor of the church I grew up in was the president of that church, it's just amazing to me. I have to do
Yeah.
a lot more digging, but I'm very thankful to you for this opportunity to share my love. And as I've said in my essay, Springfield will always be my church, even if
Th-
I'm not there.
There are so many more stories to spring from all of this, if you'll pardon the reference.
Yes,
You know, as you tell the
for
story
sure.
of you have some wonderful posts about your family home in Augusta with the long verandas and the parlor and the conversations and the kinds of people that will wander through the context of this church, the neighborhood of Springfield Village, and now the I didn't know about this before, the Tabernacle Church down the street in the other direction. I can just see this flow of people that are a part of a culture that has carried us forward and formed a foundation that is just inspiring. I'm just so privileged to have you here. Thank
Oh,
you
thank
so
you.
much,
I
so much for
enjoyed it.
doing this.
Thank you.
And I look forward to more opportunities. And all of you in the audience, it is a distinct privilege. Lisa McGuire, a distinguished historian, chimes in with one last comment that I think is so important. As we are witnessing the destruction of so many institutions, I believe that Springfield and other Black churches will become more and more important as receptacles and sources of democracy and community. And I think that's just a perfect way to close this. It's a distinct
So
privilege.
true.
You have so many thank yous and so many hearts flying around now. Thank you, all of you, for participating today. Thank you so much. It's we're going to keep on going, right?
Yeah. Yes, thank
Thank you,
you.
but
I'm
maybe not
so
all at
glad.
once.
I'm so glad.
Thank you, thank you. Take care now. Bye
All right.
bye, bye
Have
bye,
a great day.
everyone.
Have a great day, everyone.
Now, insider tip for these, I'll have the video circulate just as soon as Substack finishes processing it. But stay aware that I will be updating the notes to include things like this picture that you described and others. And of course, reference, you can go to Dr. Mary Marshall's Substack now and read her post from just last week about the church itself as background. So stay tuned. Bye bye now.
Bye.